Oh, they have one surround sound. Okay, so as I was going through the assignments last week and also the lab in particular, those of you who submit the lab, thank you. I want to remind everybody as far as malware analysis, when you do the lab, pay attention to things like, timestamp, right? Time, the event that occurred is not the time that you investigate. That's different. So the timestamp, when you go through the exercise, it shows when that event occurred, right? And that's really important because in the case of litigation, right, you have to present that in court, or in the case if it's fraudulent or whatever, right? If there's an attack, you have to make sure you report the timestamp. So timestamp of the incident is when the event occurred, right? The time of your investigation, you also need to note that, but you need to make sure that you document the event. Another thing that I found I want to highlight is your recommendation in your report at the end is really important. Focus on like what you can help the company improve, like with the malware situation, right? In the lab, we talked about how company can have more user awareness training. They need to be able to provide like more technical implementation to filter out the suspicious or risky websites, right? So those are some of the things you want, because when you become an analyst or a specialist, that's what they're going to look for. Or even if you work in crime analysis, you have to really note something like that, right? Okay. So making sure if you have questions regarding lab 1, reach out to me and then I can go over what you need, or you can go back and watch the video. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about the actual process. So today, the initial process that we need to do is to make an image of our system or our device. That's really important, right? We talked about how we need to keep everything intact. We don't want to open up the drive and explore it, right? Because that changes the state of the device. So what we want to do is let's say that if you have a USB that's given to you for investigation, how would you approach it? So we'll talk about the processes today. So in the notes, it tells you some of the highlights of your analysis process, right? So first, you need to make sure that you approach it in an efficient way, right? Meaning, and we mentioned a little bit about the tools and things like that. So have a logical understanding of what you need to do is important, I think, in cybersecurity in general. So in the investigation, think about what you need to do logically, right? And it needs to be making sure that you're not losing a lot of resources and time. So it talks about not wasting time in your investigation, and it's normal to sometime go through processes and not be able to find something, and that's typical, right? So like I mentioned, you have to be patient, but if you are logical and you are thoughtful about your process, you're going to make your time more worthwhile. Okay. So you need to have some subsets, and it talks about what kind of consideration you should have, what kind of information you need, and understanding the legal aspect of your case, and then understand what kind of data you need is important. And sometimes we might have more than what we set out to do, right? But that's really essential. And then also wrapping back, right? Because this is the money maker, right? If you don't write a report, there's no pay, right? So as I function as a consultant, and that's what I get paid is the report. And your job as an analyst or a specialist, you have to make sure that your findings is included in your report. So let's go through and answer some questions. So in our assignments, it starts with the first question. In computer forensic investigation, how can you conduct an efficient investigation? So we need to think about how we can create a process that is reliable and it uses effective tools. right? So if you are investigating, having to work with a USB drive or external hard drive or micro SD, you have to really think about, oh, potentially I am going to file card, right? I'm going to dig out the file in these drives. So the tools that you're gonna use is gonna be related to your objective of that investigation. If you are investigating the network, right, like what we saw last week, we're gonna use network forensic tool like Network Miner. So you have to really think about like what kind of steps you're gonna be taking and the tools that you're gonna need. You need to also be detail oriented, right? So forensic is investigation is something that you have to be focusing on the smaller things. Because if you miss it, it might be something that you cannot include in your report, and that could be important. So we want to make sure that we're detail oriented. So this is why, right, in this field, you only have a certain group of people that are focused in this area, right? Forensic is not abundantly like an actual position in many places, but you have to understand forensic and what it entails in an analyst position for cybersecurity, a specialist position for cybersecurity, an incident responder, right, which is part of the specialist job. So making sure that we're detail oriented. We need to also think about different ways to approach or solve a problem. This is important. Having multiple tools to be able to give you maybe possible different results, but using tools that are effective, and then critically think, right? So like any technical job, you are going to solve problem and you're going to be required to do critical thinking. Okay. Then it talks about the subsets, okay? So for number 2, 5 of the subsets for forensic analysis process includes pre-investigation considerations. That would be determining the tools that you are going to use, right? Budget, that's going to be financial budget and also time. That's important. And then the effort, that's good, and the contribution with the people. So if you're all by yourself, right, you're gonna have to look at your timeline and the requirement of the investigation. Some investigation, if you're doing incident response, a lot of the time it's very time sensitive. So for example, if we're looking at attacks coming into the network, right, if there is an included forensic process where you have to go back and see where that's coming from. And the sooner you find that information, the quicker you're gonna come up with solutions to stop that from happening again. So you have to really identify the tools that you need, the budget, and the people, okay? And normally in the real workplace or in like a security firm or an organization, you're gonna have multiple people, so team. And we'll talk about the roles later on. So understanding the case information and legal issues. Always go to the legal team if you have legal team or legal person to be able to make sure that the things that you do will not negatively impact the organization. Also checking on federal and state requirement, right? Especially when you deal with fraudulent cases, theft cases, and so talk to the attorney. So, and then because sometimes we talked about how we need to get search warrant, right? Maybe court order subpoena for technical company or cloud company to provide access to possible storage. A lot of the times those things are encrypted. So you're gonna have to be able to get permission and granted privileges to be able to access resources that is not yours or the company's, okay? And so with that, there's gonna be, coming back to the first area, it's gonna be time, right? Sometime months. So just keep in mind that they don't always respond quickly, especially when it relates to legal. Understanding data acquisition, we talked about that, the type of data that you are gonna acquire. that's essential, right? So if you're investigating, let's say, a drug case, right? Trafficking, maybe if you work for the government or law enforcement, and you're given like maybe tablets or iPhones or smartphones to investigate, you are gonna be able to find a lot of data, right? You have to think about, oh, I want communication information like text messages, right? If it's not on the phone, then you have to go to the service provider, like what we talked about. I'm gonna have email, okay? So on the device and also the service provider, maybe if they're using Gmail or another service, right? Or sometime I'm also gonna be able to find maybe pictures, right? So now some forensic toolkit, and when we go through the labs, you're gonna see it's gonna spit out everything, right? Everything that it can find from that device. Now, do we need to include all the things, right? Well, things that are relevant and related to the cases are important. So we want to make sure we think about data acquisition. You don't want 500 pages report. You want maybe close to 100-page report if it's really lengthy, but it needs to be effective report, right? So as we screenshot, we need to make sure that we have the detailed information. And then understanding the process, right? Coming back to question 1, and then making sure that your report is including all the things that you find for that case. Okay. Questions? Okay, so you can find this on the notes on the first page. This is part of the 5 subsets. So you can find that as highlighted in bold. So it gives you the breakdown, right, of each of the subset, and it's going to go into the detail, right? It talks about how when you make a decisions, you need to look at the rules and the procedure, the policy and the procedure of the organization first, right? And then we need to take a look at local regulations and also state, like, local as in city area, and then state and then federal. Now, in the equipment area, I want to point out something. So the majority of the time, you're going to see that forensic systems are very pricey, more pricey than a lot of the gaming system that you see. It's going to include maybe the 8th generation K processor might be older, but you would see that you need a lot of RAM, okay, at least 32 gigabyte, because the application that you're using, the toolkits that you're using requires a lot of the system resource. You need to make sure you have storage, right? Like fast storage. So, you can go to the link. Let me see if I can open up. So this is one of the company that specialize in selling forensic systems, right? And you can see, and there are different models. So if we're looking at the laptop, and it gives you the specification breakdown, right? And so it's gonna run roughly before tax $5,500. So you're gonna see that for the hardware. We don't need that today, actually. We're gonna need the smaller USB there. But it comes with a lot of the kits that you need, right? Also adapter kit for SATA, but you can find adapter on Amazon for older hard drives, right? I bought some USBs ones, right? SATA to USB. That's like your serial ATA cable for your drive. So sometimes you need to pull the actual internal hard drive of your older system, and then it's able to convert, right? The adapter basically allows me to plug it into my computer as a USB. Of course, it's slower. So you do see some, like there's bridge. So some of the equipment is included. So it's hardware is kind of pricey for this particular system. So it comes equipped with a lot of things. And you can also customize it with some of the companies that's offering this. And then, let's see, if you go into the second link. So this is another one by Digital Intelligence, right? So your normal brand, I think Dell has a division that has forensic systems. But you would see that there are additional companies like this. So you can take a look at it. Has a lot of the system would have powerful CPU, right? It bench at 5.4 gigahertz. So faster than your normal workstation. And then you're gonna have drives and RAM that you would need, like 64 gig of RAM. That's PC5, so DDR5, right? That's pretty decent. And so, and the speed for the RAM is fast. And it comes with the nicest screen. It comes with the case, right? Sometimes it is waterproof case, in the case that if you have to show up to sites that can be different in the environment that you normally work. Okay, so that's another option. So the Viper kit that they have here, as you can see, and then Fred L Ultra kit, there's different type of kits that you have, but ultimately it's gonna come with a powerful system, right? And all the things that you need. Yes.
Sorry. Trying to access my email. What was the password for the new password?
Oh, from lab 1. It was CIS 2023. Yeah, if CIS 27A doesn't work, it's CIS 2023. Okay, so that presented to you some options there, and then there's forensic store products, so you can take also a look at their systems, right? Yeah.
The removal device, so it doesn't automatically flush it.
For right block?
Yeah, the right block. Do these types of kits usually come with that, or is that something that not everybody uses?
I think some, like, I know the first kit came with that, and it has the bridge option for that, but not all of them have it, right? So you can customize your kit and you can request it. But right block on its own, I think normally a good right block will probably be about $200-300, right? You can probably find some cheaper. And you can also have them separate too. A lot of the people that do this, and when I talk to them, they usually would get a powerful system and then they would customize their toolkit. And that's the same with a lot of the professional insecurity, right? Because depending on the organization you work for, the cases that you work with, right? So you can acquire your tools and be able to make your own toolkit also. But yeah, out of the box, they don't always have all the things that you need. So we will have a list of all the things, the recommended tools for you. Okay, so you can take a look, right? So here is some of the things that you need. You should have a digital camera. Do not use your smartphone to take picture because you don't want to mix your personal things with the professional things. And digital camera, right? We want to make sure that we keep the timestamp on the time that we take pictures. So not that you are only acquiring the digital evidence, but when you have acquisition of systems. So for example, right, law enforcement, when they pull computers, they are going to make sure that, they tag them, right? But if you are the first responder, you have to make sure you take picture. You have to document all the model number, right, of individual systems and making sure that you go through the chain of custody and all of that. So digital camera, gloves, right? That's just added if you need. Now, old school wise, people still use notepads and to be able to handwrite if you are using some kind of tablet to take notes, just a way to make sure that you document while you're on the site. Making sure that you have appropriate forms. Every company use different things. I used to work with a company that requires everything to be tagged and bagged. So they have bags, even when you have towers, right? There's bags that you put, and then there's label, you write on the label on the bag. So every companies would be different. And then if you are pulling internal components like hard drive, memory, etc., making sure that you have anti-static bags, those are the silver bags that would contain your hardware. And then your storage media, USB drives, external hard drive, external SSD, to make sure that you're able to create images and transfer it. Write block devices, so I include some of the recommended devices. There are devices that are tested in the industry, right? And then there are devices that are not. You want to be able to use a standardized tested device. Tableau made a few, and you can find them in different range and price. And so now this one is a USB 3.0 forensic bridge. If you saw the link from the first link that we clicked, right, that laptop has a bridge that has a write block included inside as a component on that laptop. However, if you're using a laptop that doesn't have a write block, so a write block basically is gonna help you access device without changing its components, right? So especially storage device like micro SD, SSD, etc. So you want to have a write block. And then in the case if you're investigating more communication in the area of frequency, like wireless, Bluetooth, they recommend that you have frequency shielding material. This is not something that's easier to acquire, especially with the regulation that we have here. But you can check with the forensic companies that provide the kits, and they do have components for you to look at and also purchase. And then additional toolkits, okay? And I recommend having all cables, like your USB cables, your adapters, your data cable, your Ethernet cable, additional screws and screwdrivers in case you need to open things up after you tag them and took picture. And then your systems, most of the time now they using laptop, and then encryption tools, software, or now we just mostly use software to make sure that you protect your data. Okay. So we were going through, let me move it up. So those of you who are still.
If you work for like the government though, will that stuff be provided to you?
Yes.
Cause they have labs and stuff.
Yeah. And they are, a lot of the systems I've dealt with, a county that had, like, they use Workstation, and then they had bought like a Dell kit where it comes with a case and everything for the people that goes on site. So yeah, they do provide the equipment for you, and then now if you contract it into the job, some jobs they would say that you have to bring your own device. And then you would have your own tools that you need. But yes, you're right. Organization would likely provide you with the resources. So, the components for your kit, you can find that also on the notes. Sorry. Okay, so workstation. The reason why you should use also a workstation and a laptop is for more mobile, right? Workstation is if, so you want to probably use multiple systems. Can you build your own system? Sure, you can use a powerful computer to be able to do forensic. We're gonna use virtual machine here, so it's gonna be kind of slow, right? But you often see that they are gonna use powerful system. And then, all the tools, network tap sometimes can be important. And then your cables. You need to have software security keys. Right? That's just because the software sometimes would be essential, especially when you're dealing with encryption or protected data. So all the forensic laptop that you see, it comes with TSA compliant airtight case, right? You can also find the case by itself. The reason why they do that is because in the case if you are in a different environment, right? You want to make sure that your system is not damaged. And most of these jobs gonna require traveling, so that's essential, right? And then your forensic software, and I recommend using Forensic Toolkit, your FTK, depending on the brand you might try, and we'll get more into that later. Any question? FTK. Okay. So where can I find the details for this, right? If you're looking at the notes, it's on page 2, right? I just summarized what's here. And page 3. So Pelican is a company that makes those type of airtight case, but you can find other brand. Okay. So now we're gonna get more into the software, and you are gonna use some of these down the line. And I will talk about like specific type of software. So I listed some open source software, which is what we tend to use for education because it's free. And then you have proprietary software. So likely the company that you work for, they will likely use proprietary software instead of for open source. You're gonna see some similarity between Autopsy and other forensic toolkit. Because the way that they create these open source software is similar, right? It's mimicking, and it has the same functionality. However, if you're paying for proprietary software, you do have components that's gonna help you format your report better, right? So there's some feature on the proprietary software that you don't necessarily find in a lot of the toolkit that is open source. Okay, so you can find some of the toolkit information on page 3. Okay. Maybe I should break it down a little bit more for you. Okay, so Autopsy we're gonna use multiple times, right? When you use your virtual machine and it is Windows friendly, there is an Autopsy version for Linux, but it's not that user friendly. You can use it. You can also use a virtual machine called SIT, and it is Linux oriented. You're gonna see that a lot of these virtual machines, like Paladin and so on, they are Linux oriented only because it is easier for them to build for Linux environment. For distribution, it gets updates. So if you prefer that, now Paladin, if you download it, you are going to have to pay, well, a donation. It's a donation, but you have to pay, right? So I actually wrote a lab for this for my 2024 class, and I went through the process. I created a bootable USB for them to use. Paladin has its quirks, right? So you will need to read their documentation a little bit more. And it is provided by Sumery, who creates and sells a lot of the hardware and forensic kits that you see in the market. So it says it's free, right? There's $25 recommended donation, and you can't download some of the stuff unless you donate. So you can find that on their website. And then you can use Kane, which is computer aided investigative environment, right? This is going to give you like it's a software, a graphical user interface. You can download it and it's free. Okay. So, and then, so if you start out with Autopsy, great, right? It's gonna find stuff like email, all of the, even file carving, etc. And then you can get more into like the storage, right? So encrypt this detector, we can go through and look at to see if people, right? Or organization encrypt, right, their storage. And so it will check for, and it supports these general encryption. So in the case that you have a disgruntled employee and they encrypt, right? The way that we can bypass that, all admin has the key, if they encrypt. However, right, in the case that if you can't find the admin and you have to do the investigation, your encrypt this detector will also do the job. And then for network monitoring or your sniffer, we can use Wireshark. I know part B for last week lab, we privately do it. We're gonna come back to Wireshark investigation down the line, right? And then you will also need to investigate RAM. There will be one unit that we focus directly only on memory investigation, because RAM stores credential, cookies, you name it, processes. So from malware to, people who are, accessing the web and downloading something illegal, yeah, we can find all of that on RAM. So magnet RAM capture is an option for physical analysis. Network miner should be one word, right? We talked about that. We used that in lab 1. Nmap. Someone had asked me, is Nmap important? Yes, you can use Nmap mostly for footprinting. When we look at how, right, what certain system OS would be from a distant perspective, you can look at your operating system for that target system using Nmap. And then RAM capture, which is really cool. Belkasoft, if you see their website, they have some really cool CFT things, activity contests for people, and they will put out cases. I'm actually using one of their cases for my lab, and I rewrote it for an open source tool, but they sell their software. And when you compare their software to an open source software, you're gonna see their software has a lot more features. As far as, the interface is very user friendly. It has component with RAM capture that's a little better. However, there are other options that you can use. Splunk, I recommend if you get into security industry, learn how to use Splunk. Splunk is used widely across. There's lots of tutorial online and you can find Splunk. So we'll come back to Splunk. And then, some options as far as, you can find some websites. And then you can also use your USB write blocker and commercial software. So here are some of your options if you want to pay, right? X-Ways Forensics is great. You're going to see some little similarity with X-Way and another tool that we're going to use down the line. Law enforcement loves NCASE. So if you work for the police department, county, like the sheriff department, DOD, you're gonna find NCASE, and they do certify, right? In addition to, they recommend for you to get forensic, certifications to get maybe the positions, and then your FTK, which is forensic toolkit in general, right? But they branded FTK. And so as you can see, Belkasoft, Axiom, Blacklight, Recon Lab. And you can also use their trial version to kind of see, but these software can go for thousands of dollars. So, and check them out, right? And then, yes.
Sorry, you said that Belkasoft has other software on there, like
Yeah,
that acronym I didn't hear.
There are some different products that they have. There's some like would be specific for RAM, but they do have a suite. So if you look like the evidence center, it's like all in one. Okay. And then if you want only like RAM analysis, they also have specific product for that. And then they have contests and cases that they put out for the general public. And then when people solve it, right? They would publish the answer.
Oh, that's fine.
They have some live contests and then they also, so I went through some of their stuff and looked for some information. So their CFT type of environment, computer forensic, right? For participation to get people to use their software. Okay. Okay, so for four, it says what type of software should you use in a forensic investigation? You can use either or both, right? Commercial or open source. There should be a hyphen or not hyphen. So depends. Some company would provide you with the commercial software. I recommend, and in the notes, it talks about like court approved tools, right? There are kits that are tested in the industry. So in some cases, you have to use specific tools. So we talked about scope and the type of tools that we need, right? So, and it could be varied depending on the case that you work on and the organization you work for. So, I had previously taught at a private school where I worked directly with like the criminal justice department. And when I talked to the chair, they teach a forensic class that is digital, similar to this, and they had bought NK systems, right? And so I was looking into the NK systems and what kind of components, like hardware components and so on. So because the background for the person who ran the program, he used to work for LAPD. And he was a captain at LAPD at one point. He mentioned that LAPD only. So, you do see some department and some places that would prefer certain software. Okay. Okay, so now if you select a certain type of software, right? You need to be prepared to explain the type of software that you use and how reliable it is in court. So when you document, right, remember we document the process, how we found something using certain tools, right? So the tools that we use, you've got to make sure you document it and then you have to explain it, making sure that it is reliable. So how can I say that it is reliable, right? I mentioned last week that scientifically, if you're able to produce the same result using a comparative tool, a comparable tool, then you have accurate result. So you have a lot of these tested software already, so you can use those software and making sure that if you use the software repeatedly, so in the lab, we're gonna scan once, we're gonna write it down, we're gonna put out together a report, and the project, we're gonna do the same. But realistically, when you do this, you are going to have to repeat the process to see if you get the same result, right? So if I did it 3 times and I'm getting the same finding, then that's the finding, okay? But if you did it 3 times and each time is variant, right? You have to explain why or look at why it's variant, okay? Why it's different from one time to another. Now, if you're using multiple tools and you did it multiple times, what you see is you gotta make sure that they're consistently producing the same finding. Otherwise, if one is not giving you the result that the others are, then the first tool that you're using that's not giving you the appropriate result gets eliminated. Okay? And this is why the industry, you have people prefer not to do forensic, it's just tedious and long, okay? So you don't, and each scan can be multiple days or hours. Okay, you're gonna find a 2 gigabyte when you create the image, and you're like, oh, it's not done by the end of the session, right? Well, sometimes it's gonna be hours or the next day, so you're gonna have to let your system go through. So when you're looking at 64 gigabyte on an iOS phone, like an iPhone, that can take hours to go through, right? Because it's digging into the raw file at the low level. And also depending on how fast your system how powerful your computer that you use to scan. Okay. Okay, so how can we validate these software and tools? In the industry, I'm sure some of you have heard of NIST, but if you haven't, right, in the security industry, NIST is an organization that centralized a lot of documentation, right? They standardize a lot of that so that way someone new like you can go onto their website, download a template to be able to use the document, or go find the tools that they already test. So these are industry people, right? An organization that had put together a list of tested tools. So you can find it on their website under the NIST Forensic Tool Testing Project. I think I have a link for that on your notes. Okay. So we want to use validated software because it is easier to explain in the court in the case you have to deal with litigation, right? Because if you don't, you can use not validated tools, right? The attorney is just going to question it and you have to explain more why you're using those tools, okay? Any questions? Okay, so here touch on some cases for Doebert standards, right? Making sure that you have scientific valid reasoning for your testimony, and we'll talk about expert testimony down the line. I think that's at the end. And here's the link for NIST testing project, and you can go and find. So if you click on that, it will take you here, right? And you can go through, and there's software special program office, and it is supported by our government. So there's Department of Homeland Security who regularly works with them and the tools. And you can also contact the actual organization. And then if you want to go through and look at the technique and tools, you can go through their catalog, right? And then it talks about going to the search options, and there you go. So you have to go. So I went and I clicked on the link, and then I clicked on this tab right here. It takes me here. I click on this right here. And then you have to go to the search tab, right? And then you can go through the options that you need to search for. There are categories of different types. So we'll touch on second analysis, like tool validation right here. And then you can go through. You can submit a tool for them to look at and validate, etc. And that will take time as well. So, and then if you want a hardware block that is validated, you can go and click that. So there are a lot of different options in what kind of things that you're using that's validated. Okay, so based on the list that you saw from the notes, right, you can pick any of the three. I just put down some of the main ones. So autopsy. So the icon that you see on your virtual machine, that is a bulldog, that's autopsy. Now, if you're using the Linux version, it's written in Java, so you have to have your Java packages installed appropriately for it to work. And then your SIP workstation is a Linux virtual machine. You can also use Paladin, which is also a Linux distribution. And you can make a USB bootable, and then you can also use Paint, and there are other options. And then 3 commercial tools that you can see. You can use Belgasoft, you can use Xway, FTK as the brand for the software. Encase is a popular one, like I said, Blacklight Smart. Depending also, there are sub tools or smaller tools for specific needs, right? But there are, and you can also find more online, right? There are new software or apps that you can also use. But in general, you're gonna see a lot of these like listed in job description or requirement. And if you have experience with this, I recommend listing the software on your resume. That helps. Like after this class, put autopsy on there, right? The stuff that we use, like if we're using like different tools, you need to make sure that you add it. You have knowledge of these tools for forensic. Put a category for computer forensic and add those tools. Because they look for that when they look at your resume. Any question? Okay, pick 3. All right, let's take 7 down to the next page. So some of you still recording that maybe. Okay, so as I mentioned, we don't just use one tool and run it multiple times. We use multiple tools to make sure that your findings is accurate and it's validated. Okay, so on your report, you need to indicate the type of tools you use and what kind of findings from each tool. Okay, so that means that if let's say that I'm using FTK and NCase, right? And they use different type of images also. Some software would be able to accept like DD or other image, you're gonna see the type of image. And if you're getting the same output, the same finding from both of these tools, maybe running it a few times, then you have the appropriate finding for your report. So I would screenshot all the things that I find and document the type of tools that I use. Now you say, okay, well, do this multiple times with multiple tools on one system. But what if you have cases with 100 computers, right? Or more. So in that case, teamwork is probably the best, right? But yes, you have to go through the 100 images and be able to produce a report.
AI should simplify that a lot, because you're looking for patterns. If
Yeah.
you can put in a pattern there of a specific image you're looking for, then it can just go through them all.
Yeah, but we have to be careful with using like things like ChatGPT. Yeah, because number one, ChatGPT, because it's connected to the internet, there's policy with internal organization and agency that because you feed data into it, right? But I have found my cousin approached me and she was like, I want to build, right, a little AI thing for she's a pharmacist, to be able to put together stuff for drug medication for my patient. But I can't use ChatGPT because, privacy reasons, right? There are options, right? So you can download an AI version that is native to that system and then give it so that way you don't have to connect to the internet. But yes, definitely. Now that you have access to AI, it would also help you streamline like the analysis process for
So, since it's new though, do the courts allow that? Because
you can use it and have to explain. I don't think anybody validate that type of tools, the tools that we have now for AI yet. You might see some software company in forensic that they have AI integration and maybe they have it tested. I'm not sure. It's very new, so we're not 100% sure. You can use it. You just have to make sure you explain your procedures and how you use it. Okay. So, some training resources, right? If you want to get into this area, I put down some of the certification like NCASE. If you want to go international, in some cases you can. You need to get into this area. So check out IACIS. And then there's hacking forensic investigator with EC Council. I'm pretty sure some of you are familiar with that. You want to get into their CEH area. And then also, this is a very popular certification now, right? I recommend getting GIAC along with your CompTIA. They're not cheap, okay? I will look into grants to work on this down the line. Because now I think CompTIA feels like a lot of people are getting it and it's just not worth as much. So we have to get into some other certification. I know OCC, they really push for this, right? Some of their faculty are certified in this area. So you can take a look at their certifications and they have a forensic one. Okay, let's go to the next few questions. All right. So when you go through the investigation, what kind of questions should you ask to further understand your investigations? In the first week, we talked about this, right? We need to make sure we interview people and ask questions. So I put some scenario in there. So the first bullet, it says, what is the nature of the investigation? For example, is it a narcotic case? Is it a homicide case? Is it an employee misconduct? Is it a fraudulent case? Is it theft, right? Internal theft can also be investigated, and because there's digital communication, could be on email, text messages, it now land into digital forensic area. So you think about the nature of your investigation. What kind of case is it? Second, what digital evidence do you expect to find? We talked about this when we talked about data earlier, right? So what kind of data, what kind of artifacts are you going to acquire? Is it images? Is it text messages? Is it email? Is it browsing history? So in the murder case, I'm sure you've watched documentary or crime TV, and they always talk about like when people use the computer search engine, they would search for murder weapon, right? Like chemicals, instruments. Okay. And then you would see they would document things like, oh, they found surveillance camera of so and so went into the store, like a hardware store, and they bought an axe or something like that, right? And they would tie the two and two together. And so sometimes it's video footages that you have to go through hours and hours of it. But like I said, like Michaela was mentioning, AI can help you with that, with image recognition now. Is, you can feed it and you can narrow down the search. And you can streamline the amount of hours that you need to put for the analysis. Okay. Third, the legal justifications for law enforcement. Usually there's a rationale behind each search, right? Some search require consent. Okay, so some search, for example, we talked about how if the device is shared with family members, right? If you want to access each user account, you have to get their consent. So now in Europe, we talked about how we need to acquire consent. And then in some case, it has to be a court order or a search warrant. Okay. And then you need to ask who are the subjects and the suspects. Subjects don't necessarily directly relate to suspect, it could be affiliated with the suspect. And what kind of roles do they play in the investigation? So these are some of the few questions that you can get you started, right? Okay, so before we get more into that, and so the questions, where did this come from? You can find that on page 5 of your notes, right? And it gives you the details and the explanation. So one of the important things to kind of highlight is that making sure it doesn't necessarily have to be a crime scene. If you are an incident response in the security area, right? You need to make sure that you are documenting things well. But in this case, right, like corporate investigation, you need to interview people, you need to make sure you take pictures. You need to examine your systems and your device and tag it, document it. So. And then there are additional questions that you need to ask. Why is this item being sieged? Okay. Does it contain evidence, and what kind of evidence or artifacts that you're gonna find? Is there chain of custody for this item? Always follow chain of custody, even if you work for a private organization, meaning that you put down who yourself acquired the item at what time, right? And if you pass that to the next specialist or investigator, you're gonna make sure that you document that. Okay. How many people have access to it? Where was it found? The location, date and time, investigator needed. I have a friend that she used to be an analyst in this area for San Bernardino County. And she would say that, surprisingly, some of the cases that you don't think that would require digital investigation would, right? For example, drowned victim at the lake, right? So they found, right, smartphones that's left on the shore and this person drowned. So they wanted to see if there's foul play. Was it a murder or was it a suicide, right? So they would acquire the device, bring it back to the lab, and then she would go through and she would have to, look at all the messages and all the things. Was there a note, suicide notes, who was the last communicated, et cetera, right? So you would see something like that. Okay, now let's get into the next part. So one of the important things, and we're gonna follow this from here on out, right? But when you're investigating system, do not power it down if it's on. Okay? When it's off, be ready to take an image and then turn it on. Do not power it on until you need to take an image, right? Because your computer is a state system, meaning that it changes its state when it is powered on, right? Things that are volatile are the things that requires power to retain, like RAM, right? When you turn your computer off, all your application, it flushes, right? RAM requires power to retain, but your solid state drive, your hard drive, those things don't require power to keep the data, okay? Micro SD, so the primary storage, right? Long ago, primary storage was RAM. Now the primary storage, that would be your larger storage, your micro SD, your SSD, solid state drive, the drive that contain OS, and so on. So what type of system would be volatile? Your live systems that are running, network systems that are communicating, virtual machines, right? You do see a lot of like virtual machine that's being used in organizations. And then sometimes it could be physical systems that are still on. So things that are on, do not turn it off. Okay, because when you turn it off, the RAM flush out all the data and you will lose all of that information. You want to make sure that you capture everything while it's on. Okay. Okay. So this comes to page 7. And then here it talks about how you need to think about, always start with a forensic image. And that's what we're going to start doing today. We're gonna probably do another lab with it. Okay. So that means that we are taking the system information and its application, and then we're gonna put it onto our storage, right? So when we say image, that could also pertain to operating system, files, right, running applications. So let's say that if I have a computer that's running, right, I want to take an image of that. So I use a software. Most forensic toolkit will allow you to use that portion of the toolkit. Autopsy has it, right? FTK has it. It would capture what's on that system at that moment in time. Okay. And then you need to back up that image and then scan the image or the backup. Do not scan the live system, because when you do, your software is going to go in and it's gonna dig through and it modifies the state of that system. In the case that you need to go and recreate the image again, you want that system to be intact. Okay, so it talks about that here. Now the USB, let's say you find a USB and you want to investigate that USB. So USB is just a storage, and it contains that, and we would still treat it the same way that we treat a system. We take an image of it and then we investigate the image, not open up the USB. So for the project for this class, you're gonna be given a USB, right? And I don't want you to open up a USB and look at your files in there. I want you to take an image of that USB and then scan that image and tell me, right, on your report what you find, okay? Because if you open up that USB, it's going to show me when you last access it, right? As soon as you open it and you look at your files, but you want to use the software, it doesn't change the state of the files. So we want to make sure that the interaction that we have with the system doesn't change the evidence. We don't want that change, okay? Especially with RAM. Okay. Any question? Let's move this up a little bit now. Okay, so for 12, it says when you are investigating a case, let's say for ABC Corp, which requires examining network artifacts, what should you do when gathering the evidence for the system in this network? So in cybersecurity, this is very common, but in the case if you're doing crime analysis, it could be that there's someone that's committing fraud. They're transferring funds through the financial systems on the network, right? If you're looking at like banking or financial industry, that's popular. I was just reading a case a while back. This one lady, she was, it's a repetition of an old case that I've seen in the 90s. She was, you know how there's some small charges in certain checking account and people just overlook it. It was $1.50. And what she does, she works as either a bank teller or a manager at one of the branch for the bank. I think it was Citizen from US, I forgot. And so she would add these charges to these accounts. And if they question it, she would remove it. But what happened was she would take that amount and then she would put it into a different account and she would move it across different accounts multiple times. So one day, right, a financial auditor, sometimes these people are also from the cybersecurity area. They go in and they have accounting background and they started auditing these accounts. So they randomly pull these accounts to audit for the annual audit. And they found traces of $1.50 charges, right? And there have been customers that call the bank and for the service, and they were complaining that why was this $1.50? And so when she caught it, she would put the money back. And it turns out over like at least 3 years or more, she has a big bulk of money, right? not at that same bank, but the transaction has showed that she had wired it out to another bank. But they follow and they did the forensic and they found it, right? I don't wanna say like hundreds and thousands of dollars. Because the bank had many accounts and she was doing that, right? So in some cases, you will have to look at like, where did that come from? Which system it got sent to? So if you're looking at that, so first we need to take photos, videos of the systems that we're working with. We want to document the steps, right? We want to also document the procedures that we use when we're interacting with these systems on the network. And it's connection information. So if you're familiar with networking, right, I don't want to get more in depth with that, but it could be servers that you're looking at, right? So if we take the bank example, likely that you're gonna look at database transactions, like batch transactions, all the charges that was queued and pending at which date, and then how it communicate with other systems. It could be other databases or servers. And then who logs in, right? Authentication system, who logged in to process that charge at that time. So you need to make sure you document it, and then the account information that was affiliated with the login and so on. But before we really dig deep into the system, right? The best thing, in my opinion, for network traffic is network capture. Use Wireshark or Network Miner, take a picture of it, which is what you saw in lab 1. It's a capture of that moment in time. And then be able to pull it. Now, if you don't have that, likely that if you go to the network administrator and ask, they might have capture of, let's say, 2 days ago, right? 8 to 5 for the business hours for, let's say, that bank. We're going back to that example. You can go and you can ask, right? I want network capture of, September, blah, 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 right? And then see if they have it. Likely that if they are monitoring the network and system, they would have it. And they would ask you also, what part of the network, which section or segment of the network. So you have to be prepared to be able to say, oh, if you are investigating a certain region, a certain branch, and that's a separate part or a subsection of that network. So capture of your network connectivity, images of your system, especially if we're looking at databases or servers, and also appliances, right? So communication system is very transparent. It's going to do its job. It's kind of like, some system or transit system like router. It's going to pass from one network to another, right? It could be security appliance, like firewall. So if you're investigating cases like network attacks, or could be fraudulent on the network, etc., then you have to dig deeper into the logs of the system. Remember what I said before investigating, make sure we have a witness and approved, signed, right, document saying that you can, okay? Because don't start, because the legality on this, you don't want it to fall back on you. So. Okay. So for chain of custody, we're going to go to the bottom of that page and going into the next page, so 7 to 8. So what is chain of custody? You guarantee that if you're studying for forensic certification, it's going to pop up, right? This shows up for a lot of security certification. Chain of custody is also in other area if you're doing like, if you're studying criminal investigation and so on. But it is a documenting process that would include, right, all access to the evidence, right? So where it's stored, who accessed it, when it was accessed, right? So where, who, when, and what purpose. So basically, to do appropriate chain of custody, you need to document this on a form, right? Some company, they would have, like, a lot of the law enforcement, the police department, they have a form, and you have to fill out. And so on that form, it's gonna include like everybody that has access to that particular evidence, the system. And I'm sure some of you heard this story, right? So I had a friend that was the administrator for one of the city networks, close to San Bernardino. Um, and at the time, that city, they also rent out rack space for the local community members to host like websites and servers and things. And this is probably early 2000s, so cloud is kind of new in the game, right? And for the city, they won like, first technology city award or whatever. And so he was telling me one day he was monitoring the network and he found like huge traffic coming into this particular server on the rack. And it was a site that is funneled back to this one particular resident. And it turns out that the residence member was posting child pornography on he had a server farm, not just a server farm. And he said there was 16 servers in his garage, in his mom's garage. And so my friend had to pull the plug on that, right? And he had to call the police. And then, the sheriff, they came and then sure enough, they came into his residence and they confiscated all the system. And then part of the process was because it is hosted on the rack that is owned by the city that where he works for, he also have to provide information, but the sheriff department in San Bernardino County, they had to subpoena, right, that type of data. And so, but he disabled that service immediately because, based on the term of use, they have every right to do that. So that was kind of interesting. And so I was asking him, I was like, so did you know about the investigation process? And he was like, well, they showed up and they bag and tag that those servers in the garage, and then they showed up to the server room where I work, and they asked to get access to that, and they showed court order. So I provided them to 2 months access for it. And so that case went on for multiple months. And so and we talked about implicit image last week, right? That kind of pertains to that. Okay, for 14. I'm gonna move 13 down, sorry. So we can be on the next page. Okay, what kind of images do you create in digital forensic cases? So there is a forensic copy, we'll explain that shortly. A forensic image, you're like, what's the difference? And then a logical forensic image, these are the 3 types of forensic images when you deal with forensic case. Okay, and then we'll come back to the notes and I'll show you each one. Okay, any question? So these are the types. Where can I find this information? So chain of custody form would look like this. I put some images, and then when you document it, it was like this. So you need to be detailed with the technical spec on these things, right? Don't just put a USB drive, right? USB flash drive, that's not enough. You have to, if it's generic, you put generic. If there's a brand, you put the brand. If whatever what size and all of those things. iPad, model number, etc., right? Okay, so we talked about the type of forensic images, and you can find this on page 9. 1, a forensic copy is a bit-to-bit copy, right? Tends to be a little bit slower, but often very often used in investigation. This is gonna help you. It's very good for file carving. So when I say file carving, you're gonna go and find where that file is, especially when they delete the file, right? So when you, for example, right now on your computer, if you right click something and choose delete and you drag it to your trash bin, what happens is that space, that memory address where that file exists, becomes available for the next thing. At this moment in time, when that memory address becomes available, we call that a slack space, okay? Simply that it's slack, it's going back into the pool of the memory addresses and be able to use, right? So when I say memory address, all storage have some kind of address, okay? Whether using SSD, micro SD, USB, etc., right? It uses a form of address to make sure that it can locate the pieces of your file as it dynamically writes. So when you're doing a forensic copy, it takes each bit of your data or of the system information, and then it transfer it and it creates an image file, okay? And you are gonna have to use a software in forensic to read that file, okay? And some software image, it will tell you it's compatible with this type of file and this type of file. Not all of them are usable, right? So some files is only compatible with specific software, that's what I'm saying. Now, the forensic image is also a bit for bit copy, but this is what you see. We're gonna create a DD image today, okay? DD is a tool in Linux and it's been around for a long time. But it's also integrated with some of the forensic toolkit. Now, B01, notorious from Encase. So some software like Encase would make an image file called B01, B02, etc. So basically, it is an image file to the particular type of software. Now, some toolkit would be compatible with both or all, right? Some are not. So when you look for toolkits, you need to think about what kind of images you're going to be working with, okay? So you want more of a variety. Now, let's say that you're provided with one image and your software doesn't work with it, you can also find ways to convert it. Okay, some software will allow you to convert it. So forensic image, we're creating a bit for bit copy, and we store that as an image format, okay? Now, we are gonna do something like this, and then this is gonna also allow you to recover some of the deleted files, like what you see over on the first option, okay? The copy is exactly its name. So if I take a file, I right click and I copy that file, it creates a duplicate of it, right? If I take a system and I make a copy of that system, it's a duplicate of that system, right? Now the image is different. The image contains everything about that system, including its state. The copy is only going to be the content of that system. You understand? It doesn't contain its state, like when it was last booted, what was modified, what kind of application running or not running, etc., etc. So you want an image. The copy is only the content of that system. Now the logical forensic image, okay, it's only going to be the data sets of that system. Okay, so for example, system files, right? Or personal user files, like documents, pictures, things like that would be your logical forensic. So when you go through later on, when you use autopsy, you gotta tell it what you want, and it's gonna produce what you set it to do. Some student, they just click that default and next, they don't pay attention, then they create the wrong image, right? Because the software, the computer is only gonna do what you instruct it to do. So making sure we understand the difference in these. Now, ideally, we're gonna go to this option. If you want OS and everything with it, like the status, what's running, etc., what's on RAM, browsing history. But if you just want the data content, like pictures that they took, then select the logical one. We're gonna do one lab that's gonna be the logical, and then other labs that's gonna be the other image. Question? Yeah.
In terms of like the services information.
Yeah, images is exactly what that system, right? If I take an image of that system, this system right now, it's booted, it has the application, maybe it's connecting to the internet. Yeah, it has the state of the internet connection. So if someone have the browser open and if they have things downloading and running and web services, it stores all of that too. And you want that because in some cases you want to capture what is being used and and for what, right? Okay, so when we put down the time zone, I know we're on Pacific Standard and sometimes your software will tell you that, but most forensic toolkit is very good at using universal time. Okay. The reason why we want to use universal time is because one, investigation doesn't necessarily pertain to a specific region, right? And we want universal time because in computing, that's standardized for a lot of the things we do when we document it. Okay, so when we document, make sure that you select the UTC. I know when you did Network Miner, you do see that it provides you with UTC information, right? And then if you can also select your time zone if you need to. But in the case, if you have your time zone, you can convert it. You need to put UTC on your report. Okay, that's just the standard practice. Okay, so date and time zone, all of that is here, and it talks about universal time, which is your standard frame. In the case that if you work in different time zone. All right, next we're going to talk about hash value. We're almost done. And then we'll take a break and we'll start with our lab. So I know that you couldn't do this in the first lab because the free version of Network Miner, they did away with the hash component. When I was teaching this class long ago, right, during COVID, I did it online and it had the hash component until 2024. So they removed it and they added to their proprietary version. But you can use other hash tool to be able to generate the hash. When you obtain files, okay, make sure you have the hash value for it. It shows the integrity of that file. Okay, so for example, you're investigating a case, right? One file compared to the other. Let's say that someone hacked your network and they had modified one file, right? Compared to, so we have to do the comparison. We're going back, we're gonna take an image of that system, carve out that file, we're gonna get the hash for that file. Okay. When the file first created, your operating system automatically generate a hash. Okay. It is a way that the system can identify when it first created to when it is next accessed and when it's modified. 3 different things. Okay, so when I make a file, your OS gives it a hash. When I open it, look at the file, right? But didn't modify, it tags the timestamp. It's gonna say that file's been opened on such and such time. Your forensic toolkit sees that. And then I go in and I edit the file and click save, then it generates us a new hash. Understand? So when we take a look at the 2 hashes, we're gonna see that when it first created, it's different than when it was modified. Okay. So when you do file carving and forensic, it's very important and insecurity, it's very important that you identify your hash for your file. Okay, so for the next question, it says, why is hash analysis important for forensic? Because the values, the string value will be like 159E26. It's in your hex value, right? So analyzing your hash values can determine the integrity or the changes into your digital media. So if I take a picture on my smartphone, it has one hash value. I go in and I might use Instagram and modify my picture, right? And save it again. It saves it, even if it has the same file name, it generates a second hash that's different, right? So that's how we can tell if the files have been modified. Because some cases that's important, like fraudulent cases, they might modify like bank accounts and things like that. Question? Okay, so hash information, so what is a hash value? Basically, it's numerical and letter that would represent, right? It uses cryptography algorithm. A lot of the time you're gonna see MD5 for most part in most operating system, but you can use SHA SHA-256 or different type of hash. So all OSs support that at least now, right? Okay, and it talks about that here. It can be used to exclude files. It can be used to identify files. It can be used to verify your evidence. So hash is important. And if you want to, okay, for the next part, which is going to be your software reference library from NIST, you can use this link and it talks about your RDS, which is the next question. So what's the purpose of your RDS, reference data set? It's basically a large hash set that's going to help you identify what files are good when you're conducting investigation. So basically, they standardize a way to really look at what files would be adequate or, what files are good. And then the others are not part of your RDS. And so you can go to the NIST library information for additional details on RDS. Okay, so here it says exactly that, right? It's freely available for everybody to use. Some files identified by RDS may be considered malicious, and so that will be hacking tools. And then you would also, it doesn't contain hash values of illicit data. We talked about illicit data last time, or illegal images. So images that pertain to child violence, right, sexual images and things like that, it will not contain that. So, and then for file signature analysis, you can go to the next section, which is the next question. So what is the purpose of analyzing file signature? Just to make sure that your file extension matches the file type. For example, file extension meaning .exe, right? .docx, right? .excel, right? .pdf, right? And that file extension needs to match the file type. It's like documents, right? If you're having JPEG, that's image, right? So it's a way that we look at because the way that they build the software, they integrate what's called file signature to really associate the file to the file type. Okay. So when you use Adobe, for example, to generate the PDF, right? Adobe has many products. PDF pertaining to document, right? So that's gonna help you pair up the extension to the file type. You're like, so what, right? Well, the common file type you might know, okay? But what if you're gonna get into file extension that you don't know, right? You wanna know what kind of file it is, well, it helps you using file signature analysis. And forensic toolkit, some of them have it. So you can use that part of the toolkit to be able to do that. But you can also have technical knowledge that's also help too. Okay. Okay, so that's the section here. It talks about the file extension. Because some people or malware loves to also hide file extension or modify it. Some user, they also change file extension to hide evidence, right? So keep that in mind that, so that will file signature analysis help you identify the type of file for the purpose of investigation. Okay, anti-malware, antivirus. So there's that section right here. For question 19, it says, why should you use antivirus when analyzing the image? 1, to determine if malware is present on the image. If it's a malware investigation, it's probably very helpful, but you never know, right? User can be malicious. They can install malware for the purpose of, for example, key logging. Or to destroy the system. You have disgruntled employee to do that, right? There are a horizon of different cases that we deal with, right? So we should use anti-malware scans when we scan the image. Some system or toolkit has this component, most don't. So you just make sure that this is included part of your tool set, okay? And then lastly, I believe for 20, what should you include in the report? And it's very important. I know you might not like writing, right? It's a technical field, but this and all the other area of cybersecurity, or if you get into crime analysis, you are gonna have to write reports. Okay. You need to make sure, bless you, and later on, we're gonna have one chapter that we're gonna focus on, like what goes on a report document properly, right? I read your lab one, those of you who submitted, there's a lot of missing stuff, so read my comments, right? Making sure that we are, and I want you to do this right. So in the case that if I need to vouch for you, if you get hired by NSA or DOD or even a company nearby, right? I want to be able to give you reference and say, hey, this person took my class and they did a wonderful job on report writing, right? So, all right. Detail and narratives, making sure that we list all our findings, our artifacts pertaining to the evidence. We need to make sure how we identify how we found it, what kind of tools we found. We talked about that since the beginning. And then we need to explain, right, what we find, like how is that tied to the case? Okay. Remember what we said, everybody's innocent to start, right? As you go through, you can give your recommendation, but you cannot determine if the person is guilty. That's somebody else's job. Your job is to provide as much facts as possible to the court or whichever. Question? Yes.
Okay, like the company of the system.
Of a life system? Yeah, we will go through some of that. So you can use things like autopsy or software to be able to capture. So that means that you are gonna take your laptop, right? You're gonna connect to that system. So you would use like a write block component, which can be included with the laptop or a separate attached device. You connect your system to it, and that system connect to the other system. And you can do it via direct connection with an Ethernet cable, or you can do it with, so. Depending wirelessly, you can also. Now, you have to have permission to be able to, access that physical system. But yeah, so once you connect, you use the software tool and it's gonna see that that's an attached system. It treats it out like a storage on, so you just take an image of it. So it's for Windows system, it's gonna capture like your C drive, all the application. So on the C drive, it has everything, the services, your OS, everything. Okay. Okay. Any question? So I think this semester, I'm gonna focus a little bit more on like building or creating images. I feel like last year that was a little bit lacking, so they struggled with it a little bit for their project. But starting from today, you're gonna make an image of a USB, right? You plug your USB, you mount it, and then you use Linux to be able to do that, and then we'll use like other tools in Windows to be able to do the same thing. Okay. Question. All right, let's stop recording.